We speak to the leaders of today so that the leaders of tomorrow can be inspired, enriched, and better than those who came before them. Today, I'm with Christian Lawrence. Christian is a secondary school English teacher who brings a unique perspective on cultural capital and its importance for young people. Hi, Christian. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you, Tavian. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. And I think probably what's really interesting about you is I've never really actually spoken to many teachers. So one of the first things I'd like to ask is how you actually got into teaching. What made you want to do that?
Well, definitely not the money.
Yeah.
Uh, no, I got into I got into teaching because I worked out from a young age that I liked working with young people. My
Yeah.
first ever job, I had a part-time job as a tennis coach.
Mm.
I started playing tennis, and my coach thought it was pretty good and said, "Okay, let's bring you on board." I think it's about for £5 an hour. Help me coach the little uns. And I
Yeah.
thought at that time, listen, finding a pound coin behind the back of the sofa was exciting. So to
Yeah.
get £5 an hour was awesome. And so I got involved with that, and I I'll never forget. I was working with this one girl,
Yeah.
and I teach her to hit a forehand, and it would. I mean, the first few shots she wouldn't even hit the ball. The second
Yeah.
time she'd hit the net. At one point, the ball would go over, but it wouldn't go in.
Yeah.
I remember one time this girl eventually got some power. She hit the ball so hard it went over the fence, landed on someone's front windscreen, and I had to apologise for that. But
Yeah.
then, after delivering all those different tips and trying to get through to this student, eventually she hit the most beautiful forehand.
Yeah.
And I think, my reaction was wow. And
Yeah.
it was obviously, amazement at what she'd done, but also that wow, and that, okay, something, that I've said has helped you to achieve that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's when I kind of worked out I wanted to work with young people. Um,
Mm.
in terms of teaching English specifically, that was always my passion at school. It was something
Yeah.
I found I was naturally better at than maths or science. I had to
Yeah.
work really hard for maths and science, and I think I kind of blocked it out of my head because of all the trauma after
Yeah.
GCSE. But yeah, I think that the two kind of merged together, and here I am today, really.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, talk me through a little bit, I guess, around some of the things that you did, I guess, to really inspire that child to keep hitting the forehand. Because I know sometimes children, they can get a little bit discouraged. I mean, I used to be like that, right? I mean, like I would keep on going and going at something, and then if I just wasn't getting it, I'd get upset or I'd get frustrated. Like, what are some of the things you did to like get her to that point?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think the desire of every kid, right,
Yeah.
is to be listened to. Every
Mm.
kid just wants to be listened to. This idea that, God gave us two ears and one mouth for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
every kid wants to be listened to. So I just, with that young girl, I let her vent a lot,
Yeah.
a hell of a lot. Um, and once she kind of got that stress and energy out, I thought, okay, now's my opportunity to speak to her.
Yeah.
And it'd be little things like, okay, look, first let's have a look at how we're holding the racket. Okay, let's
Yeah.
put the racket on the floor, pick it up from the bottom. Okay, that's your grip. Keep that grip. Okay,
Mm.
and breaking it down step by step. Okay, now we want to turn sideways on. We're going to use our shoulder to aim.
Yeah.
Okay, make a little loop and swing. And again, she'd try it, and the errors would come, and the frustration would come.
Mm.
You let the frustration pass. You give on the next piece of information, and it's kind of like putting a puzzle together, isn't it? If you're gonna
Yeah.
puzzle together, you're not gonna jam the pieces in and hope they stick. You're gonna think about it, right? And then you're gonna
Yeah.
play them gently, one at a time, and before you know it, you've got it completed. And that was yeah. I think being involved in that process on such a small level made me realise that
Mm.
actually maybe I could do something bigger and be a teacher in the classroom.
Yeah. Nice. So I think it's quite interesting to hear as well that actually, obviously, you've taken that experience and you've taken it to become a teacher in the classroom. And obviously, one of the things that you told me just before we started the podcast was public speaking, which is obviously a big part of of teaching.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I think it'd be nice for the audience to learn a little bit about actually how you had to overcome your public speaking challenges and also how you sort of overcome your own challenges to be able to take on what you wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah. So public speaking, I say I've overcome that challenge. I don't think I have fully.
Mm.
I I stand in front of an assembly hall now, in front of pupils or worse, staff. I stand in
Yeah.
front of that assembly hall, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't get that adrenaline rush, that I wasn't thinking
Mm.
a little bit about how are they all looking at me, especially as a young person trying to speak to people who are double my age, twice the experience, and trying to tell them new things. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever tried to tell your mum or your dad something, and they've said, well, hang on, I've been on this earth twice as long as you have.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to be convincing. When my first experience of public speaking was a negative one, and
Mm.
one that kind of, I think it broke. I don't think I know it. It kind of broke me a fair
Mm.
bit, and I had to rebuild after that. I was I joined this program, and lots of your viewers will probably know this. It's National Citizen Service. It's called NCS for short.
Mm.
And essentially, this program it's just like a smaller version of Scouts, in that it's like a 3-week program whereby young people are supposed to be inspired, and do lots of things and whatnot. And it is a brilliant program. And for part of this, we had to promote a charity,
Mm.
and try to gain funding for them. And as part of that, in our group, we'd all rehearsed a speech, and deliver optics, and which you'll know far more about than I will, and then like data and market research and whatnot,
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. And I've always been someone who's fairly prepared, and I had that all prepared. I knew my words laid out for me, and then the time came where I was in what was in effect a hall of about 300 odd people, and I'm there as a 14, 15-year-old boy, and I go up to the stage, I breathe in, chest puffed out, ready to do
Yeah.
it, and I go to speak, and the words just won't come out. They
Yeah.
just would not come out, and start to panic. I get hot flushes, and I'm thinking, oh my god, I want to curl up into a small ball here and just die, and
Yeah.
become part of the floor beneath me, and not be in front of
Yeah.
these people. I know I said in the mics, I can't do it, and I walked off. And people who are working with are brilliant. They carried on from me. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
even said a little bit from what I was going to say. But I came away from that feeling like a failure, a real
Yeah.
failure. And I think it took time for me to rebuild my confidence after that,
Mm.
but I did. And
Yeah.
I think when it came to being at uni, I was a student ambassador, and I had to do presentations there. And whilst you could sense the nerves in my voice, I think I gradually overcame that. And
Yeah.
I'd love to say that I worked out a quick trick that got me there.
Yeah.
I think the reality is, at that point in my head, I'd already hit rock bottom. I'd already
Mm.
stood in front of 300 people, and
Yeah.
and humiliated myself, And so I thought in my head, can't be any worse than that. And
Yeah.
so it got better and better and better.
Yeah.
And now it gets to the point, as I said, where I still get a bit nervous, and the adrenaline's still there, but I think you learn to back yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
You learn to realise that actually it's something you can do if you don't put so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I guess it would be interesting as well, because obviously that was a challenge that you had, and you knew that you wanted to go into teaching as well. How did you deal with that, I guess, problem as well? Did you know that you'd have to be standing in front of kids every day, and how did you start to, I guess, conceptualize that in your mind?
Every trainee teacher, the
Yeah.
first thing that's going through their head, almost every trainee teacher, is, will I be able to handle the kids? Will they
Yeah.
like me? Are they going to abuse me? Because I think we've all been in lessons, right, as kids ourselves, where we've had those teachers who have just thought,
Yeah.
this is an extended lunchtime, man. This is not.
Yeah.
This guy is a victim, or this
Yeah.
woman, she's an absolute victim. She's not teaching me a thing. We're gonna run riot. And
Yeah.
it's all well and good being sat in the chair listening to the person talk, but when you're the person talking, you got to make sure you're establishing authority.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was nervous, but I think by the time I came to do my teacher training, because of that experience I had at NCS,
Mm.
I think I knew that I could do it.
Yeah.
I absolutely knew that I could do it at that point. I wasn't as scared as other people. It does help a brief comment on privilege. It does help me being a tall white male teaching
Mm.
English with a booming voice. If
Yeah.
I was small, I didn't speak the best English. Then I'd have to work a lot harder, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think slightly nervous, but I think
Yeah.
most of my nerves had already been broken as a result of that previous experience.
Yeah. And I think one thing for the audience that might be quite nice for you to say as well is sort of how would you encourage someone who maybe really has a desire to do something but knows that there's sort of one or two challenges that they have within themselves, whether it be public speaking and the job requires them to do presentations every day, or like how would you sort of encourage someone to take that journey, just sort of take that leap of faith that you did?
It's cliche, but I'm a firm believer in you miss 100% of the opportunities you don't take.
Yeah.
And I can't say that even now I see an opportunity and just go for it straight away. I'm quite calculated as an individual in a good way, I like to think. But often, if I'm in a high pressured environment, I've learned that the way I work, I don't know if it's healthy or not, is I bottle up the nerves. I bottle it until it gets to a point where I'm quite, the bottle's full of fizz and it's quite uncomfortable, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to do something now because this is more painful than actually doing the thing that I'm scared of. And so I do it, and I let myself do it, and 9 times out of 10, it ends up fine. So I'd say to those people who want to take that leap of faith, think about how much you want it, really. Think about how much you want it, and if you want it a lot, then I think you'll kind of start getting frustrated at yourself for not for not going for it, and another day will pass, and you still haven't gone for it. And if you find that frustration keeps building up, and if you keep thinking about that one thing, then I think the only way you get past it is by doing it. You push yourself into the unknown, which is scary. It's so scary, but we live in a society that seeks comfort. A society where we're kind of almost trained to fit in with the crowd and not jump out. But you've got to go for it, and it's got to come from within, man. It's you can't have someone else tell you. I've worked with kids, and I tell them to do things. I don't always get the way. I need to show them why they need it before I just tell them.
Yeah, and I think this is really nice actual like guidance into the whole idea of cultural capital and its importance on the development of children as well. I think it would be nice sort of actually to give the audience a little bit of a flavour in terms of how some of that actually impacts a lot of the way a child develops, and I guess starts thinking about how I can overcome some of the challenges that I might have. I think it would be quite good for you to sort of present that as well to the audience.
Yeah, happily. Yeah. I mean, this thought I had actually came from watching a podcast that yourself, Paul, and Jacob did not long ago about is more education the solution to poverty? And I think in that podcast, I think it was Jacob who made the point actually about how kids need to be exposed to different job opportunities and careers in order to have that motivation within to actually try and achieve things. He without realizing, and I bring an educator's kind of lenses to this, without realizing he was talking about this idea of cultural capital. The idea of cultural capital is before any learning takes place, before the teacher starts talking to the student, before they pick up a textbook, cultural capital is about what learning have they done outside of the classroom. And that boils down to, from a young age, how many times have they been taken out of the house by their families to, I don't know, even the shops, a theme park, a zoo, okay? And that's really important because lots of the students who I work with, and this sounds crazy, lots of the students who I work with, who I teach, haven't been to a zoo before or haven't been to a theme park. And so in English, for instance, there's on language paper 1, there's a question 5 where they are shown, you might remember this, Tavian, it wasn't too long ago, right? Where they are shown a picture and they have to describe the picture or write a story suggested, and that's for their GCSE exam. Now, if that picture is a picture of a zoo, and a child's never been to a zoo
Mm.
in their life, doesn't matter what I've told you, no, not doesn't matter what I've taught you, how are you supposed to fully engage that picture and describe it? Because you're not in
Yeah.
that moment, you're not going to be thinking, a child who has been to a zoo isn't really going to be thinking about what Mr. Lawrence has taught them about
Mm.
zoos. They're going to be thinking about that time they went to Colchester Zoo and they saw
Yeah.
the rhino, the rhinos, and they saw the lions or they saw the elephants, doing a massive poo, and
Yeah. Yeah.
felt that and they experienced that disgust
Yeah.
inside. It's things like that that help their creative writing come a long way. And
Mm.
they haven't learned that at school. They've learned that through getting out and living. And it's
Mm.
cliche, but learning isn't just something that's done inside the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think the battle we face, certainly in the school that I go to, but I know I can speak for schools across the boroughs in Essex and East London. The battle
Mm.
that we face as teachers is we live, and you touched on this in the podcast. We live in an area that's very much socially and economically deprived,
Mm.
where we can't blame these parents and carers, but trips to the zoo are sometimes sacrificed to make the weekly food shop,
Yeah.
and it's important that their sons and daughters are fed before they're taken to the zoo, and that makes sense. But there is a
Yeah.
cost to them missing out on those
Mm.
trips where other students get to go to them. I'll end my point on this note here because it's really interesting. It's just from another English teacher who I work with.
Yeah.
We took our kids, our year sevens, on a trip to Shakespeare's Globe in London, and as we were walking across the Millennium Bridge, this teacher turned around to two young year seven girls and said, "Right, girls, passports out, please, before we cross the bridge."
Yeah.
And they started to panic. They really started to panic because these girls had never been to London and they thought that they needed a passport to cross the River
Oh
Thames.
wow. Yeah.
And then they really started to panic and they didn't know. Now, the person next to them laughed because he'd been to the airport, he'd been on a plane, he'd used his passport and he'd gone to another country. But so many of our students have never left the UK.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so their cultural capital is a lot less. It's a really, really important thing for our kids to have.
Yeah.
And there are ways of building it, but primarily get out of the classroom, get out if you can.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because I remember reading a book called Grit. I'm not sure if you've come across it.
Okay, I can't say I have.
By Angela Duckworth. I might share it with the audience as well. I'll put it in the link. But the book basically was explaining why some kids might naturally seem more motivated or naturally like tend towards more challenging things, and it was sort of playing on what you're talking about here around cultural capital, which is the idea that kids that generally have to overcome more challenges or they experience more things as they get older, they're more likely to become a bit more talented maybe at doing things, and they just seem to be better than the rest, but it's actually just because they've been exposed to more. And like she mentioned, interestingly enough, how it was like in a study where children that were learning how to play a musical instrument at quite a young age were actually performing better in subjects like maths and English. And it's actually just because they had that exposure to something different. And as you said, it's like getting out there. They had that exposure, and I guess again, their parents were able to afford maybe music lessons or whatever it is, just to get them out there, and it opens up their mind and allows them to take on more challenging things, basically.
Yeah. I'll add to that by saying something that I risk lots of your viewers turning off at this point.
No worries.
I'm going to talk now about the importance of reading. Okay.
Yeah.
Whilst in an ideal world, every child gets to go to the theme park. Every child gets to have their own musical instrument and learn to play them, and have, and even more ideal, every child gets a teacher to teach them to play that instrument.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that as Paul touched about on the podcast as well, we know for a fact that funding is a massive issue for schools in and outside of London. Probably more so outside of London, though the government is so London-centric in their focus.
Yeah.
it's such an issue, and unfortunately, I don't see that issue being solved anytime soon to the point where every child gets access to improving their cultural capital significantly.
Mm,
But there is a cheat code. There is one cheat code that every
yeah,
child can do, and you know what I'm going to say: read,
yeah,
read about stories, um, read about the tiger who came to tea as a primary school book, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah,
learning that tigers roar. You're learning that they're not animals who are kept in a house. Okay, you're learning, that they're not toilet trained as we are.
yeah, yeah.
Read about I don't know, James Bond books, and learn about MI5 and stuff through there. What
Mm,
what students have, and we had it though our parents, less so, the internet as well. Now,
yeah,
it can be a dangerous place for our young people, and we've got to be so careful with it. But with the age of YouTube and TikTok, though I'm not as much of a fan, you get to see these pictures and you get to see these things
mm,
taking place, and it's an insight into things that lots of our kids can't afford. But at least knowing that those things are available, knowing that
mm,
knowing that you can work, I keep coming back to a zoo for some reason, knowing that you can work
yeah,
in a zoo, or knowing that we do have Canary Wolf on our doorstep. I know you've got a few financiers amongst yourself. Like, we've got Canary Wolf on our doorstep, the financial
yeah,
districts, the financial hub of England, about 20 minutes away. Knowing that those places are there and learning what they do there is so important
mm,
to give our kids the motivation to want to do more. And like I said, lots of our families don't have the money to afford these days out on these trips. TFL prices are ridiculous in itself to
yeah,
get up to London. But every school, every school has some form of a library. We're
yeah,
very lucky in that our local area has libraries scattered around it, and we need to be encouraging kids to pick up books, lose the world around them, and dive
mm,
into something deeper.
yeah, yeah. I really like that point, and I think it might be nice actually to end off, I guess, the conversation with the final point that you mentioned around one of the key pivotal moments that you had in your life around sort of your first ever lesson as a teacher. I mean, what were some of the emotions that you were feeling as you were going into it? I guess just introduce the whole story.
Yeah, so my first ever lesson as a teacher, um, at that point for me, very different to the first public speaking issue. It wasn't
Mm,
nerves, it was excitement. It was
yeah.
I felt like I'd gone through enough for it to be my time. I felt
Mm,
like I
mm,
knew what I was doing. I was trained. I'd read every theory under the sun on my PGCE course, my teacher training course. And we were doing it. I was going to be teaching a lesson on Of Mice and Men. I don't know if you're familiar
yeah.
with the book.
Yeah,
Did you
familiar
read it
with
at
that.
school? Lots
Yeah.
of reviews, yeah. So we were doing a lesson on Of Mice and Men, and
Yeah.
in the book, there's an old man in the book called Candy, and his dog is quite old, and the men in the bunkhouse they were on a farm. The men in the bunkhouse are really fed up of how smelly and stinky and how useless this dog is. And Carlson, one of the men, goes up to Candy and says, "Look, your dog's old now. Let me take it outside and shoot it, put it out of its misery, and we can all live a happier life." And Candy, being this old man whose only companion has really been this dog, is very
Mm,
much, please don't take my dog, please, please. And he's pressured and pressured. Eventually, he kind of gives in. He rolls over to one bedside, looks away because he can't bear it. A few moments later, the dog's taken outside, and a few moments later, you hear a gunshot go off. My first lesson, I decided to turn that classroom into a courtroom where
yeah.
I completely changed the seating plan. And this speaks levels of my confidence now, because the Christian of a few years ago, 4 years ago, certainly would not have dared to do something
Yeah.
like that. I turned the classroom into a courtroom where it was like a horseshoe format for the seating. I was sat right in the middle, and I said, "To our right, we have accusers. Is Carlson guilty of murdering Candy's dog?" And then I said,
Yeah.
"To the left, we've got defendants. Should Carlson's justified actions be justified? Did the dog need to die?" And I'd set up this debate in such a way. I think lots of teachers will lead and talk, and that's important. But in that
Yeah.
lesson, I actually took the pressure off myself by making the students the teachers. and I facilitated things, and I asked questions, much like you do brilliantly on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I let them take over. They took the lead, and they were battling to and from, argument.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, but how can you say that? Because no, but listen, I'm not saying that. And all of
Yeah.
this going to and fro. And I sat there about halfway through, and I was sat on the middle of the desk, and I was almost in some sort of trance.
Yeah.
I was like, I've done it. This is it. I've done it. This is my. And my mentor said, because in your first year you need a mentor in the classroom in case it all goes wrong. She said to me, Christian, that was your teacher moment, wasn't it? That was your teacher moment. That was you working out that you can do it. And I said it was. And I think that's a moment that will forever live with me. And I think largely because of the hardship I faced before with public speaking, knowing that I overcame that fear. And I say overcome lightly because I'm still not there yet. I still feel nervous. And maybe I'll always feel nervous. Maybe it's a good thing. But that moment, that first lesson for me was pretty special.
Yeah, that is actually a special moment. And I think hopefully, I mean, maybe all of us actually can relate to maybe a moment where you've maybe worked hard at something or you've done something, and then sort of you can sit back and you can look at it and be like, yeah, I've actually done it, or I've actually, like, this is my moment now, like I've actually achieved it, kind of thing. So it's really
I hope so. And for anyone who hasn't reached that moment yet, it goes back to that question you asked earlier on about how do you encourage people to look at the risks, to be scared but to act on it. I really would say, like, keep checking in with yourself. Do you still desperately want to do that thing? Is it still something that's weighing on your mind? And if after a week or so, or 2 weeks, however long you need, if it's still there, then I would just say you haven't really got a choice. You've got to do it. You've got to push yourself, because otherwise you're always going to be in that position, and it's not a healthy place to be in. You'll feel so much better, even if it goes wrong, when you finally take that jump.
Yeah, definitely. This was a really good conversation. I think, as you know, we normally end the conversation with one question. What is one thing that you would advise your younger self, Christian?
I've mentioned it already, Taven, but I'll go back to it. You miss 100% of the opportunities you don't take. I'm always telling my kids that say yes to something before you say no, because you can always say no later on. But if you say no to something, you can't say yes when you've thought about it afterwards. So take 100% of the opportunities that are presented to you. Say no later on if it's not your thing, but life's too short to not live to the full.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Last lesson as well. So thank you, Christian. I'm sure we're actually going to see you again.
I hope so. Thank you.
It would be really nice actually as well to have you on the education conversation that we're keeping on going. So if you are following that conversation, we're continuing that, and hopefully Christian will be part of that as well. To come on again to give some insight. So thank you very much, Christian, and thanks to the audience for listening. If you listen this long, and we'll see you on the next one.